I'll give those over to Kat, but we're gonna operate as if we won't, and that's fine. Rodney requests that people speak one at a time. And if you're reading anything, please be mindful to read at a normal speaking pace, because when we read, we speak more quickly. So let's just be mindful of like our enunciation, our volume, and like our speaking at a good pace so that we can, and James can keep up. Cool. So we got.
Can I also announce that there'll be, so I'll announce there's ASL and closed captioning during the panel?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Katie, I might need you to go to the library now, please.
That's the goal. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move, and we're gonna get started in 2 minutes, and we'll give you guys the signal.
And then it's just the fade.
Well, I'm recording now.
You're recording the Zoom, correct?
And I'm gonna record the Zoom.
She's got
I'm
the
gonna do that now.
I don't want to mess with the.
More stuff.
Kat,
Yeah,
do you
exactly.
wanna? You can hide me
So
now.
you can probably close Gmail.
It
Probably
won't let me.
close
It
some of
only
these.
allows non-video.
Do we need any of the? Oh, we need
Oh,
the.
okay, stop.
YouTube.
Maybe YouTube? Maybe?
Maybe we don't need it.
I don't think
You're
so.
right.
Thanks everyone. Really appreciate y'all. Excited for this conversation.
You try closing it up.
Thank you, Katie.
Close this one at least.
Easy.
Alright, that, no BS, everything else is closed, room is open.
Can you all see me now? Is that
That's a little better.
better? I'll be at the hotel in a second.
Sheldon,
Giving us whatever else.
Sheldon, maybe you want to go off camera until you arrive to your place. That way, it's not so like jarring.
Is me? Okay.
Yeah. I want
I
to say
mean-
it's muted until you actually transpose
Katie, I think it's
that
fine.
arena
Okay.
into, or that scene. Yeah.
Okay. Whatever you feels best.
Are you arriving soon, Sheldon, or are you in DC?
Yeah, we just want to figure out how to do a couple of blocks away. Get stuck in the traffic.
So it's
But
8:45.
yes, I can hide
Will you
and then pop in.
just let someone know when they should start?
When do you want to start?
Now.
Okay, I'm going to count down from 20, and then by the time you get there, we're going to go live. So tell them 20 seconds. 20 seconds, you're live!
Oh, everyone's muted. Okay, we're gonna go live. We're gonna go live in 20 seconds.
20, 19, 18,
Just checking really quick.
17.
Cherri's done.
16, 15, 14, 13, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
We're live. Yep, we're up.
We're live.
Is our Zoom muted? Is our Zoom muted?
I can hear a cat. Cat's talking. She's loud.
One's not. Why does it transition to you?
Try and resync. I mean, it says.
Yeah. Is our Zoom muted? Is our Zoom muted?
Cat's muted.
Scroll down.
Come on. Is this the page?
Scroll down.
Another Gulf is Possible was started by several women of color in the Gulf of Mexico as a response to the lack of support and the lack of attention um, being made to many of the issues that you've seen, right, in Jesse's film, The Land, and more recently, um, I've become a part of the circle. It's a small circle of women of color from each state that makes up the Gulf of Mexico. And because of the frequency of storms and because of the very, very real need for recovery efforts from the ground up, this is something that, from the time of the film when I was with y'all, a large majority of the work that I have been occupied with has been preparing for, responding to, and adapting for the next storm. And so this vehicle came to me from a friend who was leaving the country. I think him and his wife got tired of being in the US, and was really, really fearful of what this election might mean, right? What could happen. And so they had an opportunity to leave, and they had this vehicle available that I saw as an opportunity to turn into a rapid response communications vehicle that that I could afford, just to be open and honest. There's plenty of like um better vehicles, I'm sure, for moving trees or helping haul goods to communities just hit. But I thought this was really a special gift, and that was presented with me, and it belonged to a friend. And so, you know, I hope that we can use this to continue to do things like y'all just did, you know, elevate stories of folks in the Gulf, and continue to shed light on real need. So, for example, Lake Charles, that was hit and devastated by 2 storms this year, you know, they continue to suffer, and yet the cameras and the news and the press are gone. You know, so they're just starting that journey. So this is one way, and it will work in tandem with other projects that each of the members from Another Gulf are working on, like collecting rainwater, filtering it, and redistributing that during times of need. So many of us in the Gulf have had water boil alerts, almost monthly, and these issues will continue to persist. And so, you know, that's just one idea of many that we're hoping to implement. And you know, I thank you all for supporting that project, and you know, keeping us in your hearts and minds.
Thank you, Bryan. I wanted to welcome Cherri. Thank you, Cherri, for joining us. Are you calling in from Louisiana?
Actually, no, I'm in New Mexico right now.
Well, everyone.
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to introduce you to the audience. Cherri is an author and an activist, and we first met her at the Bayou Bridge Pipeline protest camp 2 years ago. And so actually, I'd love to ask you a question now, Cherri. We were talking about how since we saw each other 2 years ago, how the world has really changed. And I remember you telling us the story of how I think the pipeline was cutting through the actual house of someone, and how that made it an urgent issue, not just environmentalism, but cutting into people's lives, homes, and communities. I would love, because I think a lot of people watching this are maybe new to these issues. I would love for you to explain to people how environmental justice is different from just environmentalism and what your approach is.
Sure. My name is Cherri Foytlin. I am staying in northern New Mexico right now. I'm a Dene woman. I have 6 kids, and we lived in South Louisiana for 15 years and ended up having to leave for a couple of reasons. One being that we just couldn't keep the water away from getting in the house. We had 2 floods while we were there, and both times it made my kids really sick. And so, but the other reason was because we were fighting the Bayou Bridge pipeline there for 2 years or so and had to leave for our own safety. There was a lot of intimidation, not just from some of the locals. For the most part, it was from the police departments and the agencies, the governmental agencies that were supposed to be there to protect us. But as we see time and time again in Black, brown, and poor communities, they are not. They are more in bed with the corporations themselves, or the people who are doing the damage to us. So when we did Bayou Bridge Pipeline, we did everything. We we had petitions, we had art parties, we really invested in local communities all along the pipeline, and as far as like time and energy and getting to know people. So we had a great network before we ever even got started, of people that were in and out of EJ or environmental movement. Some people just cared about, economic justice and things like that. So we were able to bring in a very diverse coalition of indigenous folks, Black folks, landowners, crawfishermen, and have this really wide range, and a great deal of support. And then we had our direct action campaign, which was rough. Like, it was as hard as it gets out there. And And what we ended up doing is saving that 11 acres so that the pipeline did not go through it. They ended up going around us. The pipeline did go through, but now we had 11 acres that we could use to the degree with which we always wanted, which was to have just transition space, which was to have models of food sovereignty there, which was to be able to bring native and non-native kids in and show them how to do traditional medicines, traditional arts and crafts, traditional, and how that can lead back to environmental justice. Because a long time ago, I heard someone tell me, I think his name was Bryan, Parras, tell me something about how it's not just about what you don't have in your community. It's about, what you have in your community, whether that's like refineries or plants or whatever. It's what you don't have in your community. And that in our community, we didn't have those places, those gardens, those places where people could go and just enjoy being outside in nature and not have to pay a price for that, or not have to pay some insurance fee or something for the use of those lands. So now we've added that. So I like to talk about how direct action campaigns can have longer consequences building towards a just transition for these same communities that are being affected, and how we can actually use our struggle to create a better position for people within our movement to move forward and create more and more justice for people.
Thank you. Congratulations on stopping that 11 acres, you said?
Yeah, we saved 11 acres. It's now food forest. It's called Indian Bayou Food Forest. And we've been feeding people. We had space there for mutual aid in Lake Charles when we had people that were staying there so they could help Lake Charles, and still are. And yeah, we do a lot of mutual aid for the Navajo Nation up here in New Mexico. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Cherri. I wanted to now bring it to Jesse. Everyone, we got to see your beautiful film. We saw the interviews with everyone on this call. And we also saw your dad, Larry, again, with his blessing on the land. And we heard about your recent works, your paintings. I remember recently you were telling me that you were moving towards a dream and vision of regenerative spaces for nature and for art and artists. I would love to hear more about that. Cherri kind of talked about resistance. I remember she said one person sitting on the oil pipeline cost the company $200,000 for an hour, I think. But direct action is so powerful. And then on the other hand, you also have mutual aid. And like you said, Cherri, turning that pipeline area into now farming and food. So I'd love to hear from you, Jesse, about your experience with Hamatsa and what does regenerative mean for hope and humanity.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Kat. For anyone that doesn't know who I am, Jesse Littlebird for Laguna and Kiwa Pueblos. Hamatsa is seated almost smack dab in the middle of the state of New Mexico. So if you get a map out of New Mexico, point right to the middle, that's where Hamatsa is, which is on the trip we showed y'all the land marker that when they had originally surveyed it goes way back to just after almost the Pueblo revolt, and that was a really good spot to start the film and start our journey as well. And Hamatsa, like the word comes from continuum, like I mentioned in my little interview, and kind of just piggybacking on what Cherri was talking about. It's a space for that learning to happen, that sacred knowledge to be unlocked, a model for a way of living that is obtainable. It's not unobtainable. And so just kind of activism through that, through healthy living, through the way that we can teach the youth and teach them a better world, yeah, to kind of answer your question, Kat, just.
Yeah, that was beautiful. It was very inspiring for me and Sebi to talk to you, I think a few weeks ago, about your inspiration with the land and creating those spaces. So it's not always fighting, it's also building and creating at the same time.
What the assets we have right now. That's what I'm kind of talking about. Land-based learning, land-based activism, land-based actions, you know, and I think that we're really trying to prove that at Hamatsa.
Thank you. Doreen, I remember when we first met, you were introduced to me, to all of us, as a water protector, a PhD and also a water protector. I feel like recently with the health risks and climate change and fossil fuels, water often gets overlooked. I would love for you to talk about what you see as the future of, oh, is she here? Did we lose, oh, Doreen? What you see as the role of water and how that relates to the, I think, struggles and causes that people are focusing on today.
Oh, thank you for that question. I really like to, make the connection between the land and the water. The earth is made up of 70% water, and so are our bodies. And so what we do with the earth also relates to our bodies. You know, we have to protect our Mother Earth. She produces for us, life. And what would happen if we don't protect her and, do things like stop pipelines but also communicating with the water has been really profound for me, as well as communicating with the land. And so I've been kind of just trying new things. And so when I go to our river to pray, I was putting my hands on just the very surface of the water and not putting my hands in it, or, just feeling the surface. And if you try that sometime, you can feel all the waters of the world. There's like an energy of it. And so that was really profound for me. And the water gifted me with this idea of if we can change the water based on the energy of our intentions, that emoto, there's some science behind that. Through prayer, we can really affect things, and also through our bodies too. So I've been really learning a lot by just testing things. When I went to Maui, I put my hand on the island, I touched the ground, the dirt, and I asked her, what do you want to teach me? I asked Maui, what do you want me to learn? Because I was skipping a major Indigenous research conference to be at the beach. So I was like, I still want to learn. So what Maui told me was, take aloha back to your people. And that has just been so profound for me, because when I translate it into my community, because of the chaos, during this pandemic, and it's been really stressful. And so it reminds me, bring aloha back to your people, also to my family. Like, instead of focusing on the negative things, try like, it's up to me if I want to face my family like full of love, or if I want to be angry. And so touching the land, touching the water, asking it to teach us has been really profound. I've learned so much.
Thank you. Sebi and Sheldon, the two of you, words fail me, but anyway, I really, really honor our connection, the three of us, and us taking that journey together. It was before you joined Eaton, Sebi, and now we've come full circle again. As life evolves, we evolve, and our conception of this whole project of Eaton evolves. I know that a part of our journey was visiting the Piscataway, and we met your mother there, Sebi, heard about your ancestors. And Sheldon, it was really powerful to visit the park now, but it used to be the former slavery plantation. And I know that's the source of a lot of your art. So maybe Sebi first, if there's any thoughts you want to share, what did watching all the films and interviews tonight bring up for you in reflecting on the last few years?
Yeah. Well, our road trip, I grew up here in the DC area, and I've always been very grounded here. I had been out west a few times, I guess, sort of casually, but it was my first time really touching the earth in the way that Doreen described, feeling the Pacific Ocean at the beginning of our journey and bringing that with us. And being indigenous from the East Coast is kind of a unique experience. I think a lot of times when we talk about Native people in this country, we think about the West, whether it's the mythologized sort of plains Native experience, or the Southwest, which a lot of people think of in aesthetic terms and abstraction. People don't realize that Indian country is from coast to coast. So for me, interacting with this huge diversity of landscapes and the indigenous and land-based people that call them home, it just brought up these very, I guess, powerful revelations about the things that connect us, and the waters that connect us, frankly. The experience of being indigenous from the DC area in particular, I think, brings a level of irony to it, of course, because for a lot of people across the country, they think of DC as this city with the monuments, and it's the seat of what is essentially a Western colonial power. And there's a dichotomy, right, where it's like, oh, well, here's the East Coast and all the cities and all the Western colonial power, and then here is the West, and the West in Indian country, and the wilderness, this this romantic landscape. But then it was really cool to be able to share a little bit about, no, well, this is Indian country too, and in some ways, a lot of the stuff that people are experiencing out west, we experienced it first. It started here. So it was just cool, like having those different experiences touch each other. And then, of course, the uniting theme of our road trip being environmental justice was very meaningful to me, because even though I grew up in an activist family, environmental justice wasn't necessarily at the forefront, because I think for many generations we were talking about very visceral survival issues, fighting, erasure, racialized violence, loss of land and sovereignty. I mean, all these really immediate issues that my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and all the way back what they were dealing with. So the framework of environmental justice, which has come to define my generation, it really felt like, okay, this is our generation. This is the vocabulary we're using to describe our struggle as Indigenous and land-based people. And then the last thing I wanted to say was meeting Sheldon's people was really meaningful to me too, because here we are in this on this island off the coast of South Carolina in this village, and what it was like shaped differently than our neighborhoods. It was a circle, and people came out of their homes and interacted in the center of this circle, which is different from our square, neighborhoods in the city. So seeing this identity, this Gullah Geechee identity, in living and breathing and dancing and talking and singing and everything that we were doing when we visited Pawleys Island, it was like, well, here is a Black indigeneity. Here is a Black indigenous or land-based experience where, even though maybe they're not from here thousands of years ago, there is such an intimate resonance between Sheldon's upbringing and his experiences, and then ours as Indigenous people of this continent as well. So that was really powerful to see.
And Sheldon, I know that throughout the last 2 years, I've gotten to experience your artwork a few times. And as you performed, the thoughts were really, really powerful and almost hard. I'm speechless. It's hard to talk about. That's kind of how I felt when we were at the former slavery plantation, just this depth of pain and suffering that you imagine that it's not even, it's too much for words. I'm like tongue tied now, but I would, that's probably why you use performance art to express these thoughts. I would love to hear how your work has evolved over the last 2 years, and I know your what that means to have such a strong sense of roots in Pawleys Island with history that dates back so long.
Yeah, and to contextualize this to this trip, like, this too was my first ever cross country trip. And, I think when we first started, like after leaving LA, and we visited Larry, and he shared with us a lot of stories that not only contextualized his ancestral narratives, but then he also talks very specifically about, his understanding and experience of like my people's experience in this country, in this land, and yours as well, Kat. And it felt very grounding. It really kind of helped me to informed my own pathway and narratives along like this 7-day trip and going into all these communities. And then, how it rang really true, seeing, what Cherri was fighting for, and, and contextualizing like what's happening in the Gullah Geechee region and those coastal barrier islands. It's like we have happened upon as a people some of the most beautiful, land in the country, that mix of water and land and tree and these colonial structures now that, brought us here are now, the same forces that are moving us out. And, and like, without that, like we don't have a real connection to the home that, we know that's ours, like, from thousands of years ago. It's like, walking the diaspora backwards is, it's a very, it's a very challenging thing to do, because like, you can't walk your way backwards into the language and the culture that you were extracted from so long ago. So, when we finally made it down to Pawleys Island, and, and I think, just to give everyone a little context, like I live and on the same grounds where the former Brook Green and Springfield plantations were. So I still live in the same village where my enslaved ancestors lived. So there's a connection there to that land and that history, and what it really provides for me. And I think what we kind of experienced when we went back to the rice field that had been restored, it's like the brutal beauty of what we could only imagine the experiences back like that were, but then tapping into how it feels right now in this moment. And I think the kind of through line there is the struggle for home that is very consistent around a lot of these marginalized communities and these identities that we have found in this country that we call the United States. Those same narratives are true regardless of what the language is. It's just as true for the Vietnamese American community that we saw and in the Gulf, as what Bryan is fighting for, what Cherri is fighting for, what Doreen is fighting for, what Larry Littlebird is trying to preserve. All of those narratives are exactly the same, and there's just a difference in the language. But when it comes to our ceremonial and ancestral practices, we find the commonality, we find that shared language and that shared experience. And, it really made for a very beautiful, eye-opening experience and connected me to parts of, America historically that I didn't think that I had any connection or place to. But it was made clear that, this country that has been created, this concept definitely belongs to us.
Thank you, Sheldon, for sharing that. When you said home was really a thread, I remember a conversation I had with Larry Littlebird on the land. He was teaching us a lesson about the land and how we don't own it, and it's the relationship to these rocks that used to be stars. And he talked a lot about home, and I asked him where is home, because I think out of all of you on the road trip, I was the one without a physical land somewhat to call home, because I'm bicultural. And so it's this concept of physical home, like Cherri, the water literally coming through your house, or Bryan in Houston, people's homes like over like an inch from an oil refinery, having the physical home impeded on for environmental justice, but also having the concept of like emotional, cultural, spiritual home constantly battered. Seeing that emotional battering of the home plus the physical impediment, that was very powerful on our journey. And that leads me to ask you guys, I remember hearing stories from so many of you about Standing Rock and how that was really historic, because it brought so many generations and tribes together for one cause. And that had never been done before. With all of you on this call, all of us, I know that we're each fighting individual struggles, but they are related. What is the through line? How can we support each other? How do we build that solidarity? Because that's something I saw last year. There were so many protests in so many regions of the world, learning from each other, but that sense of solidarity, where do you think the legacy of Standing Rock is today? How do we support each other?
I can give it a shot to start off with. I really appreciate the continued connection that we have, and we built our homes in Standing Rock. We had a Pueblo camp for us, and then we all went back to our homes, and we're continuing the fight for us. It's protecting Chaco Canyon. It's protecting Bears Ears. So there's a lot fracking going on, and we have to really just look in our own backyard. Also, I would say repatriation of the land would be a really great call to action. Sometimes I can't even go pray at sacred places because now there's property signs and fences, and a lot of land owned around our reservation are owned by Texans or people that don't even use the land. So I thought it would be a great idea to ask people if they're not using the indigenous land that they somehow inherited or came across. It would be really great to look out somebody on there, who was original to the land, and because we were original stewards, and we knew how to take care of it. And so that would be one way people could help. Thanks.
I know we're all really wanting to get our calls to action out there. It's a mad scramble. I know that there's so many with Bayou Bridge even. What's after that? I'm sure there are more threats even after you won the 11 acres. So, and I remember Doreen, yes, Chaco Canyon, we were there with you. What are the calls to action that you want to highlight for our audience tonight, and how can they help?
Yeah, go ahead, Cherri.
Okay. Yeah, so we have nobvp.org. If you want to go there, you can go on Facebook. We are in continuous needs of funds to do the work that we do. It's a lot of times for grassroots organizers, we end up putting all time, energy, cash, everything into our communities or into the work that we do. And then we get burned out. We get tired. And that's what we have another location here where I'm at right now in New Mexico is about, and that's supporting the people who are doing the work. A lot of times it's about when you see people doing this work, it's about, do they need to be able to keep their own internet on, to keep the things moving? But it's also about, sometimes I ask people, do you need me to come do your laundry or watch the kids for a little while you go out and actually do something? Or, so I'm always a big I always say support the people who are doing the work that you want to see do it happening in the world, because in those communities, there's nobody that has the answers more than they do. So if you want to really be supportive, then you just ask, like, how exactly can I help you? What is it that you need right now? And if you are a person that does this kind of work, you've got to be brave enough and strong enough to say, I need this. I need this. I need a break. I need some sleep. I need to be able to pay my phone bill, you know, and reach out to people. And that's its own kind of bravery right there. But yeah, go to communities and ask them what it is that they need, and then try your best to provide that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, to the first part of your question, Kat. I think it's important for everyone to recognize that wherever they are, wherever they live, wherever they're from, that the land that they are standing on is sacred. It's sacred, um, whether you believe in that or not. And it has its own inherent right to be there and exist. But it is, I think, important for everyone to recognize that the land that they stand on is sacred and it's worth protecting. My grandpa was a farm worker, and I never had to work the fields, but my mom did, my grandfather did, of course. And it's something that remains with me. So when I hear just the beautiful stories from Doreen and Jesse, and the power of connecting with people in similar fashion to the water, it's as simple as that, simple gestures that remind us that we're connected, and then we can communicate with everything, and that we don't have to touch it even, right? It's the intention and the spirit that you put in your thoughts. So that's one. And then secondly, for call to action, because the storms, like I said, have played such a huge role in the work that I do, I wanted to lift up two communities in Nicaragua that asked for help, that were hit by Eta and Iota consecutively, and are now, they completely lost everything. I put the link in the chat, so if someone from Eaton can share that with the audience, that would be great. But that is, something that I think is really important. The indigenous communities who have contributed least or fighting the hardest and suffering the most, right, is the reality right now. And that's true for communities of color, even with the storms, but also with COVID-19. So since the 2 years that we started, I think it's really interesting that a trip that was about, connecting and traveling across the country, we're now confined to our computer screens and stuck in our homes, um, just to be safe, right? And to protect others. That's the world that we have come to in just 2 years. The entire planet, not just folks in a neighborhood sheltering in place. The whole planet is sheltering in place, and a large majority of the population does not know how to do that. So this is going a lot longer than it should have to. So be grateful, and respect the land that you're on, and know that it is sacred.
Just wanted to share a line that Doreen wrote in our chat saying, the front lines are in our homes now. But Bryan, that's such an important point. It's such a contrast. We were literally doing the most, the Great American Road Trip, which is like the farthest, you can imagine and see. And we physically visited all of you. We broke bread with you, had meals with your families, and that wouldn't be possible today. But I think it's really special that that one week road trip has led to us. I mean, we're in constant contact since then. So the connections that come out of that are enduring despite the distance.
Well, that sounds like some spiritual connections to me.
Can I add something real quick? Just kind of hearing Bryan, everyone really, really inspiring to me. I think the best direct call to action I can really have is like COVID made everyone mobilize. And I think it's kind of a positive, made everyone mobilize on realizing the communities that were affected, because it's a global event, you know. But like in Houston and in the South, there's a storm every year. There's a COVID every year, you know. And it's like that for a lot of these communities. And so I think what people could do on a personal level is kind of what like Cherri was saying, you know, look out for your neighbor. You're noticing that's the most best direct action I can think of in my practice, along with taking care of myself and leading by example to the young ones, you know, that I might see, to even some of the older ones. Like, hey grandma, hey, do you need some wood? You know, we didn't get to meet up with Lauren on the trip, but Lauren Anthony out at the Navajo Nation, he runs Chiz for Che, which is they gather wood all year round for the Navajo Nation, because a lot of these tribal elders out there don't have heating. They have wood stove still, you know. And I mean, that's what I've been doing for the past falls, just been chopping wood for my mom and dad, because even though they are truly sovereign and completely off the grid, to get through the winter, they need a huge stack of wood, you know. And so I think that's like the best, you know. It's like I say representation is nice some places, but like reparations are better, you know. So you can give with your dollar, but you can also just give with like looking at these individuals, because behind each one of these individuals and activists that we met along the way, they had many, many, many people behind them. And you know, that's what you're supporting. You know, the activists are the ones with the voices, but there are many people that they're holding up along with them. You know, that way.
I have a question from the audience. I hope I get it right. We have one question. A lot of our cultures think of the land, so it is about the land. A lot of cultures think of the land as feminine, a matriarch. Are there any traditions where the land is seen as a patriarch?
It's the Western tradition.
That monument that we saw, Bryan, in Houston, the one.
That's pretty manly looking, right? No, it's weird too, right? Because we have all these monoliths like popping up in weird places, and like folks are fascinated, but it's like, I don't know if anyone noticed, but the real beauty was what was behind it. And yet, like, all of the press and everyone is focused on this, you know, metallic phallic symbol. And it's such a metaphor for, you know, what's wrong with our culture, and what we're taught to pay attention to. You know, it's the same trope. It's like, you know, some explorer went out to this wild place and like left his flag, you know, left his mark. It's exactly as Sebi said. That's the Western culture that has a masculine approach to the planet. The planet is a life giver, and only women can bear life. So that's I don't know.
do.
Yeah.
I do. I have, I know when they talk about Purification Lodge in the Lakota, Dakota, and those aren't my, that's not where I come from, but I have heard them call, the rocks, the grandfathers. So just for the question, our audience, they might look into that.
The audience's question actually makes me think of the Condor and the Eagle, the prophecy. Bryan is in a feature documentary, The Condor and the Eagle, playing tomorrow, and he's also moderating the panel about that tomorrow night. But the prophecy of the Condor and the Eagle is, I remember I called Sebi, I think last year, just ecstatic because I feel like I was having revelations about the prophecy. But the eagle representing the masculine and the last 500 years of colonialism, capitalism, industrialization, all of it. And that the condor is the feminine. And then when they meet, that's when human consciousness will uplift and heal and bring us to the next level. So it's about that time. But the audience's question made me think of that.
Yeah, and I just no disrespect to any cultures that do see the planet or Earth as a masculine or a male embodiment, and knowing that just gender, right? To speak of gender is also a very Western concept as well. But yeah, it's I'm sure there's an infinite number of ways that folks relate to all of life here.
And I think it's also, now that we're talking about those different energies and whether we express them as gender or within certain cultural understandings of gender or not, the eagle and the condor, which we're going to screen tomorrow, it works on a few different levels, because right now I think there's like when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, there was this renewed energy and like going out and getting in the street, getting involved in organizations, activism. I mean, going to Standing Rock, hitting the road, all these like external things. And I like, and coming from like an activist family, like I had already been sort of exposed to all that and involved in all that, but there was just like this moment of like warrior up, and then since the pandemic, ironically, which to me in a weird way, the pandemic is like the culmination of the nightmare of these past 4 years. It's actually been like warrior down, where it's like, actually, let's look within, let's do that reflection work, let's do that building, community building, family building, like turning back to the heart. And I feel like we've come further in a lot of ways in the past 9 months than we have in the past 3 years of all these mega marches. And no hate on the big NGOs, I used to work for them and I've worked with and around them for a long time, but we had like a march here in DC like every week, and it was like, and I worked for the People's Climate March, and it was this multi-million-dollar budget, there was like hundreds of thousands of people. It didn't stop Trump from pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, and it didn't stop hurricane of the week, on the Gulf Coast, and all these other things we're talking about. So it's like I've seen like people grow so much. Like Jesse went back to his land, he's chopping wood. There's a big pile of wood at my mom's land that's just been there looking at me, and I have to chop it. And you reminded me that, and I've been procrastinating it for so long, and now it's getting cold. So it's like, there's so much, there's just like so much power to us looking within, building that food forest up, and like what Cherri was talking about, like we've grown so much in this year from warrior down and looking within, and that yin energy, like I think we'll reflect on this positively in a lot of ways.
I'm up, Bryan. I think I one of the things I've been thinking about, like as I've been processing like COVID, I think the one thing that COVID did for us collectively was reminded us or informed some of us how far away from home we really have been as a people. And that really connects into what the land is talking about. Like, I think it's most of us understand who work in the spaces that I think one of the primary things that oppressive cultures do is try to disrupt the home of the people that they want to oppress. And I think there's nothing more physically or psychologically violent is just ripping someone from the concept of home, not the necessarily brick and mortar, but the concept of home and what that does to psychology when you feel like you don't have a place. And I feel like a part of some of these shifts that we've been talking about, and a part of like what COVID has really helped to facilitate, is for us to get a better understanding of like our relationship to home. I went to South Carolina during the quarantine, and it was there that I really got into practices much like Bryan and Sebi are talking about. Like, I helped my mom raise the chickens. We planted a garden, and that feedback loop, that short loop, actually did quite a bit for me as someone who's steeped in trying to dismantle racism and ableism and sexism and all of these other big things that for the work that we're all doing right now, we may not ever see the fruits of that labor. But it was something very powerful of having that short feedback of like watching the biddies get hatched, watching the kittens be born, and watching collards and ochres come out of the ground. And all of that is deeply connected to the land and that cycle and the give. And I think a part of like, because I'm definitely processing the feminization of the earth as the mother earth. And I think like there's this abundance of extractive practices, where it's take. And I think that really aligns with the misthinkings around engendering things like this. So it's something about, as humans, how we think about our relationship to the earth and the things around us and being things that we take away from. And I hope that we don't lose our memory too quickly of this experience that we've had for the last 6 to 9 months, and hopefully that it'll help us all find our way back to home.
There's a lot of, this panel is very balanced. I feel like we have talked about the yin and the yang, the resistance and direct action, and then really that need for the farming, the soul, the home. I just wanted to point out that, Doreen, when you were telling your story earlier and you were doing this to really show us the water, that was very impactful for me, because I think we get caught up in, urban life and things that actually don't really matter. And so when one is struggling, I'm going to remember this, because that's always there.
Beautiful.
Beyond all of our generations.
And even this, when we have to drink water from the sink, for example, on our reservation, some people might think that that's not good water, or it's not clean, it's not filtered, it's not bottled. But when I get the water from the sink and I say how beautiful it is, I say love or butterflies or rainbows or whatever, something positive, because the energy, right, it resonates, and then you take it in, it fills our body. So I think during COVID, water is medicine. It's overlooked. We have all these other, over the counter, under the counter, but there's also the natural stuff. So the water is medicine. You can, charge it up to purify ourselves. So I'm glad that helped, Kat.
Oh, you're unmuted, yeah.
It's about time for us to slowly wrap up, but I would love to offer you the chance if there's anything more you want to share before we log off and go back into our cocoons during COVID.
Join us tomorrow.
So something the Eaton team can do is we can collect your organizations and calls to action, and we'll put it on this same festival website. So check back here. We'll highlight the different groups that Cherri and Bryan and Doreen and others work with. Thank you for this time.
Awesome.
I feel like just in this Zoom, we created a very sacred space within the last hour. So thank you.
Yeah, and just one last point, like on Sebi's note of Sheldon's community, we got to figure out a hack to make the Zoom squares into Zoom circles, and it'll be even more sacred. That would be awesome. Bye, y'all. We'll see y'all tomorrow for the screening of Eagle and the Condor. And so good to see you, Cherri, Doreen, Jesse, Sheldon, Sebi, Kat, everyone. Good night.
Thank you for making the time, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, squad.
Sebi,
Stay
let us know if we need to
strong.
Love you.
for you.
Peace.
Sebi, let us know if we need to come
Yeah,
chop wood for you.
Ilana.
Come chop wood.
We'll go chop wood for you. We'll fly out there.